We've reviewed in the past how to use tonality to make things look metallic. We've talked about the idea of striping, about how the highlights are next to the dark tones and how the striping effect makes things look metallic. Okay, this kind of idea is used very often to render cars. Okay, so this is a photograph of a real car from the 70s. You can tell from the way the rims and the fenders look, it's an older car. But you see these shapes that are being reflected in the side of the car, and then you see a soft fade of color in the sky. Okay, this is the sky reflecting off the top of the car. So some of these reflections and these highlights and things, they're a lot softer than they are here. Like here they have a harsh edge. Okay, so in order to render this kind of idea, the car designers, they use markers and pastels. Okay, so the markers are more in the bottom portion of the car. These are reflecting the horizon line. They'll use the markers on the back edge of the car. This is reflecting the tree that's in the background. But then the sky is represented, being reflected with the soft pastels. That gives that soft pastel look. So you've been using the markers to create dynamic shapes. I want you to use the same kind of concept to create these nice dynamic reflections that are sort of dancing on the side of the form of your form. And then I want you to use the pastels for a soft fade, reflecting the upper part of the object. Now also, they're using highlights. They're using paint or paint pens, just like we discussed before. Okay, here's the last example. This is a white car and a black car. Okay, so if you're matching black marker with black pastel, it gives you that effect. The same idea if you're using a color, if you're combining the same color back and forth. Okay, this purple marker, it matches the purple pastel, and it goes together very well, and you get that same idea of striping and those dynamic shapes being reflected on the lower side, and then here's the soft fade on the top. For your homework assignment, I want you to take some of these dynamic marker shapes that you've been developing, these quick strokes, and I want you to render them using markers and pastels in this way. Okay, so take some of these ideas and render it out this way. Okay, you're going to follow the same formula. You're going to put the marker reflections on the bottom edge, and then the top, you want to keep that soft pastel look. As an example, let's use this one here. Okay, so we have a zigzaggy thin element that's sort of aiming this way, and then we have that nice curve that goes around like that. Okay, so let's say this curvy element is sort of cylindrical. It's very much a serpentine cylinder. Let's give it some dimension like that. And then we're going to add this sort of zigzag element here. So let's make this more rectangular. Sometimes they call that rectangular stock or circular stock, okay, when you talk about metalwork. So let's add some dimension, and let's sort of start to develop this form. Okay, now what's happening? How are these things attached? Let's do a little sketch to sort of help us visualize how do these things intersect. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little blow-up sketch that sort of helps us visualize this thing. Okay, so This thing is very rounded all the way around. This is just, again, we're just sort of loosely thumbnailing this thing out so that we can figure out what we want to do. And then the shadow, think about the shadow and what that shadow shape is going to look like. It's going to kind of look like this because we have our light sources from above. And then the edge of the shadow is going to line up here. The edge of the shadow is going to line up here. So we're going to wind up with a shadow like this. And then and we're going to have some of those reflections. They're going to sort of look like this. Okay, remember the bottom side is going to have that dark area, right? So this is sort of a thumbnail to help us figure this out. Okay, now this is a little thin, so maybe I'm going to change the proportions a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting. So now we have dominant, subdominant, subordinate, and we have our three forms. So here's a good thumbnail as a reference. So now let's slide this over and let's start to draw this thing nice and big on the page. Okay, so let's get that main gesture first. Sometimes things change a little bit when you transfer it from small to big. That's okay. You know, it's important that you get the main idea across. So here's our basic form, and then let's add sort of ghost in where we want our shadow to be. So now we have our sketch, and we're ready to add marker and pastel. So to make my life easier, I have already put together marker and pastel combinations. Okay, so inside each one of these Ziploc bags, I have an index card that shows me what the pastel looks like, shows me what the marker looks like. I have the marker, and then inside a little piece of cardboard, I have the pastel to keep it safe. So for the purposes of this rendering, let's use this this bluish color here. Okay. So just like before, we're going to start layering our colors. Let's start with the marker. Okay, this has a fine tip and a broad tip. And we're going to use our little thumbnail here as a guide. So we want to put marker in this area and this area. And we want to capture some of that sort of, we don't want it to be a plain shape like this. We want to have that top edge where that horizon line is. We want to capture, you know, some of the feeling of those marker gesture, those strokes from those graffiti markers. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is sort of do that basic shape like this, and then now I'm going to add some of those gestural strokes to give it that feeling. Okay, and you want to you know, leave some white in between the marker, so it's not, you know, you don't want to be completely like black and white. You want to be fairly you know, fairly loose and have all kinds of shapes involved here. Okay, so we're going to have this wrapping around here, and we want to feather on the bottom, you know, feather out that marker on the bottom here. So same thing here. We're going to add some of these shapes here, add some of that gesture to it, and then we're going to fade it out, feather it out towards the bottom. Let's add a little bit of marker to the side of this, the zigzag element here. Okay, so now let's let the marker dry and we're going to start adding pastel. So here's the pastel. I'm going to be applying it to the top edge here. I'm also going to have a pastel fade from the marker down a little to the bottom of this form. So I'm going to scrape a little bit of my pastel where I want it to go. I'm going to put it across the top. I'm also going to put it underneath the marker on the top of my form. Same thing here. Let's add this pastel to the top edge of the bottom of this form. And then there's going to be a crossover where this connects here. Let's add some pastel to the front surface of this form, and then a little bit to this here, and also the front of this as well. So now let's take our cotton pad, fold it up, and then let's apply some of that, that marker. Let's soften it. Remember, don't worry about going over the edge because we're going to use the eraser. At first, the pastel is very soft, so we're going to have to come back in and darken it up. So some pastel colors are darker than others. So this one's very, very light, very, very soft. So in order to make this one pop a little bit, I'm going to draw with the pastel right onto the paper. Not all pastels work this way. You know, if you have a darker pastel, you don't want to go too heavy with this. Even with the pastel, use some of those gestural strokes, okay, that we practiced. Okay, let's soften it a bit. This thing's starting to come together. It's a very, very light color. It's starting to come together. It's starting to make sense. Okay, we may want to outline our drawing now so we don't lose everything, but it's starting to come together. Okay, we have a very gestural form. Let's add some shadowing too. Let's use our pastel to add some shadowing. Let's go nice and heavy with it. So this marker comes with a thick and a thin. So let's use our thin line to outline this drawing. You can always use a pencil or a felt tip pen. If you want to go black or use a gray pencil, it's fine too. What's nice about this marker is it matches, the color matches exactly. Okay, so the outline really helps sort of define. Maybe we'll add a little bit of line thickness, sort of help us define this edge. maybe we want to punch out some of these reflections a little bit. So let's add a little bit more marker, like a second layer of marker. And now it really starts to pop right there, right? Same thing here. You want to sort of line up, where those darknesses, they should go together. Just add some more of that sort of quick gestural marker work. Now we're really starting to see this thing take shape, okay? So let's use an eraser and let's clean up some of these edges, some of my loose pencil marks can also be erased around the outside lines, Let's get rid of our eraser shavings. Let's develop this a little further. I'm going to want to punch out, some of these elements here. So I'm going to add some more marker here. Let's put a little bit of marker reflecting off of this top edge. Make this edge a little bit darker. And also I want to really show the intersection between these two shapes here. So if this surface is reflecting, let's make this a little bit lighter here. And also, we're going to have some of that lightness, in this top surface of this this cylinder edge here. So let's remove some of that. And now it starts to pop. Let's keep working these shapes a little bit. Let's brush away some of this. Okay, so now let's use a little bit more of our marker to sort of help us define these edges, sort of punch out these contrasts. We can also go back to our pencil, and we could use our pencil to help us sort of define these edges here. Think about line quality too. Where these two forms intersect is probably a very important part of the drawing. So let's add some nice line quality to this area here. And then you can also add a little bit of shading with the pencil if you want. But don't go too heavy with that because the colors don't really match. Okay, so now this thing is starting to take shape. And then, of course, our shadows, right? That bottom edge next to the shadow is going to be nice and dark, right? So let's add some of that punchy line quality there at the bottom edge. So now this thing is really starting to take form. Where these things turn the corner is probably also very important, right? Where this side of the cylinder, hits the front face of the cylinder. Let's add some of that in there. Now we can use our Posca pen, and we can add a couple highlights. We could also use our eraser a little bit. So add some of that striping in there, really make it pop. always go back and juice up some of those pastel areas. We haven't fixed this drawing yet with the fixative, so now's a good time to sort of add some of those juicy pastel, thick, dark pastel color.